Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Schaefer Library's Information Literacy Workshop series. Today, we're going to be presenting on Presentations 101, which will help you prepare and give presentations effectively. So the topics for today's session include the importance of presenting, selecting an appropriate presentation format and software, the process of building your presentation aesthetics like text, fonts, and colors, and then preparing and presenting your work. So to start off, why would you want to even go through the discomfort of presenting? Everybody knows it can be nerve-wracking and you can get nervous, and some people just don't like doing it because they don't think they're good at it. Well, the more you do it, it actually alleviates the fear and anxiety that you feel towards presenting. So the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. It also develops communication skills that will serve you well after you graduate from either college or any kind of postgraduate program. It is also required for many jobs, being able to present in a public setting or present a speech of some kind. A lot of these skills apply to customer service jobs, business positions, or even presenting research findings in a job or pitching a new idea to a superior. Presentation skills are also applicable to everyday life. When it comes to just making phone calls or running errands, you have to be able to communicate information well and communicate it in a way that others will understand. But kind of the fun part is that presenting can actually be fun if you do it right. The example that I have on the screen is actually a panel that I presented at an anime convention in 2022. And this was the screen that had the description of the panel that I gave. And it was actually a really fun thing to do because it was on a topic that I actually was interested in. So if you're able to cater your topic or presentation to something that you enjoy, or even implement things that can make the presentation less boring, it can actually be kind of exciting and can actually turn out to be fun. Once you kind of get over the anxiety or the any kind of fear you have towards presenting, because once you figure out a way to make it interesting, it gets you kind of more invested and more excited about showing people what you have to tell them rather than just, oh, I got to get through this. This is going to be awful. This is going to be boring, kind of a thing. So that's why if you do it right, it can actually be a fun thing to do. So for the live session, we had shown videos that kind of talk about the process of creating a presentation in kind of a funny way. They were both Saturday Night Live skits. And for the purpose of time, I'm going to include the links to the videos in the video description. They're also available on our Canvas page if you'd like to visit that and go to the links there. But basically, this slide breaks down, what did they do wrong and what did they do right in terms of making an effective presentation. And for context, in the video clip, the first video was about using PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint, and then the second one was about Papyrus, which was a commonly used text font that's available on, I think, Microsoft Word and other word processing programs. So the what did they do wrong and what did they do right portions here are talking about the first video clip. So if you want to watch that and pause this video and come back, you're welcome to do so. But to basically break down kind of what the clip did was it had two groups of people making a presentation on a similar topic, and it kind of showed the difference between what is a bad presentation and what's a good presentation. For the group that kind of did the poorer presentation, these are some of the things that they didn't quite do right. So they had, no main idea. They had a lack of knowledge on how to use Microsoft PowerPoint, because that can really impact how you can create a presentation. They had overlapping images and a lack of flow and transitions from slide to slide. They also had lack of confidence and they were very ill prepared, and they started to overshare and get off topic when talking about their presentation. So on the other hand, the group that did a better job with the presentation, they had clear text and fonts with colors that didn't contrast or they weren't too similar. They didn't have too much text to overwhelm the audience. They had a balance between images and text, and they showed confidence when presenting their work. So that kind of breaks down what you should and should not do when making a presentation, but we kind of use these videos to provide a visual and just to be a little bit more entertaining with doing this workshop. So when you're designing your presentation, regardless of what kind of presentation that it is, even if it's a speech or a poster or a PowerPoint, you want to ask yourself these questions below and figure out what type of presentation you need to make. So the first thing you want to pay attention to is the assignment or project type. You want to check what the assignment requirements are with your instructor just to make sure that you're following the right instructions to make the correct presentation. Once you get past that, you want to think about your audience. Think about who will be listening to your presentation, and it can be any combination of some of the examples here. It can be your classmates, so students, it can be professors or the general public or any combination of the three. You want to think about the subject of your presentation as well. Make sure your topic uh, show impact or think about your topic and how it might impact how you would present. You may also want to consider using visuals. A lot of visuals can be really helpful for explaining a complex idea or showing statistics. So using a graph or a chart that can be really helpful with statistic heavy research topics. Lastly, you want to think about the format. So think about how you will present the material. Is it going to be in person? Is it going to be over Zoom or virtual? Or will it be both? In some cases, you may present to people in person, but there will be people on a virtual call as well that you would have to present to. So that's very important to consider, especially if you have to think about both formats. Um, you have to figure out how to best communicate to both groups at the same time. So these are the questions you want to ask yourself when thinking of the presentation that you're making and how you want to design it. So once you figure that out, there are many different presentation software options to choose from. And we included some of the most common ones, but there are probably more than what we've included on these slides. And I kind of won't go through every single one just for the sake of time, but I did break down the advantages and disadvantages of each one. So the first one is Canva, which people have used to create marketing flyers and things like that. But it is a browser-based presentation tool that requires an internet connection to use. It is free to use and has a good image editor. So you can even use this program to edit an image and then just copy and paste it into another presentation. The disadvantage to Canva is that it is not necessarily free for all features, and it does not support PowerPoint files. So you can't transfer a PowerPoint file into Canva seamlessly to, save yourself time. Everything has to be made in Canva. Next, we have Google Slides, which is probably the most commonly used out of most of these softwares. I know it's the one that I use the most often, but it's accessible through a Google Gmail account and it's part of the Google Office products. It's basically Google's version of Microsoft PowerPoint. So if you're familiar with PowerPoint and have not used Google Slides, it's a very good option for you as well if you don't want to use PowerPoint. It's entirely free to use and it does support PowerPoint files, so you can actually make a PowerPoint and transfer it over to Google Slides, or you can create something in Google Slides and then import it into PowerPoint. So that's a really handy tool and nice function there. You can also share slides with others. So if you're working on a project with multiple people, you can share the slides with other people and they can also make edits, which is nice. And you can also save slides as other file formats and it saves automatically, so you don't have to worry about saving. Saving slides as other file formats is helpful to create handouts or just to have a printout of the slides, just to make notes for yourself or to help you prepare for the presentation. The only disadvantage is that it does require an internet connection. You can always download the Google Slides as a file and then work on it offline. It's just not going to show the changes on the original version. And so if you're sharing it with others, they're not going to see the changes. Next, we have Microsoft PowerPoint, which is part of Microsoft Office Suite, and it's a standard presentation software for Windows devices and very similar to Google Slides. It has universal functions and can be imported into Google Slides. And it also does not save automatically, so you want to make sure you back it up. We also have Prezi, which is kind of an unconventional presentation software, but it uses animations in a non-traditional format, and it's not a series of slides, it's rather a flow of animations. So it's, like I said, it's a little unconventional, but they're free presentations to make and they're open to the public. You know, they're accessible online. They're not necessarily private. So if you want to keep your items private, this may not be something you want to use, but it is free to use and it does saves automatically. The disadvantage is that it is a non-traditional format and not compatible with PowerPoint. So everything that's made in Prezi will have to stay in Prezi. And I will actually show you kind of what an example of Prezi looks like, just so you can kind of see. So this presentation is on how to negotiate a salary, a home sale, and everything else. And so you can kind of see there's different sections of the presentation here. So you can kind of go out of order, actually. So first we'll go to negotiation part. You can kind of see it isn't necessarily slides, it's more of a combination of animations. But there are arrows on the bottom where you can go to the next section. So this does allow you to go in order if you choose to do so. So that's kind of what Prezi looks like. I had to use it once for a project and I was not a fan personally, but some people like it because it's a little different than slides. So it's up to you, whatever works best for you and the project you have. So how do you know which software is best for you? There's some things to consider. Think about what softwares you already know how to use. It's going to take a long time to learn a new software. So if you're a little pressed for time, you don't want to take the time to learn how to use a new software unless you're required to, of course, because that's going to take away time from how you need to actually prepare your presentation. You also want to make sure it has the features that you need for the presentation itself. Make sure it has, space for images if you need it, functions for adding graphs and charts if you need something like that, and just making sure it's the best fit for your project. Think about which ones are also most accessible to you. Are you going to be working on something that's offline, where you won't have an internet connection? If so, you may want to consider PowerPoint instead of Google Slides, or something like that. If you have internet connection most of the time, then that really opens up the options for you. If you are working on a project with a group, then you may want to consider a software that allows you to share so that you all can work on the same project. Most of the time, it is recommended that you use a software that you're familiar with to avoid wasting a lot of time learning the software's functions and having technical difficulties on the day of the presentation. If you're a beginner in terms of using PowerPoint or some kind of presentation software, the most beginner-friendly options are going to be Microsoft PowerPoint and Google Slides, because those features on those programs are pretty universal and they're going to be able to be applied to other softwares as well. So if you have a project where you want to use a visual aid, they're a great way to communicate your ideas to the audience because they show rather than tell. and this keeps the audience engaged and interested. Examples can include posters or trifold displays, videos and photos, graphs and charts to show statistics, passing out a handout, or having PowerPoint slides if you're just giving a speech where you wouldn't have a presentation that you created. You do want to think about a couple things when creating a visual aid. You do want to use contrasting colors for text and background. Use limited text depending on the type of presentation. So you may not want to use complete sentences or use more like bullet point phrases. And kind of going off of that, you want to do that to summarize your main points. And don't be afraid to get creative. So a lot of different creative visual aids can be applied. Of course, follow your assignment instructions, and you can always check with your instructor before using a creative visual aid. But most of the time, they would usually be welcome because it's unique and would help with keeping the audience engaged. So some creative visual aids can be a music or song, a short performance, wearing a specific type of attire or costume, using food, or having an audience activity for the presentation to help them understand something. Music can be really good because it can help people remember things. But really, the whole point of the creative visual aid is to really help make the presentation memorable, and so people remember something and they can take away something meaningful from your presentation. If you remember a few slides ago, I showed you the presentation that I gave at that anime convention last year. For that presentation, it was, if you didn't read the little description on the photo, the presentation was on talking about character archetypes. And a lot of times in TV shows and movies and things, there are usually characters that kind of fall under the same type of personality or character category, kind of going along the lines of like, there's usually one person that's the main character who is the leader of a group. There's usually the logical and smart one. There's usually one that's kind of more aggressive or has very physical about how they encounter and solve problems, those types of things. And I usually what happens with these types of characters is they're usually associated with a color. And so what I used in my presentation was I had color-coded pieces of candy that I had the audience members take. And so I had them pick out their favorite piece of candy. And so I had them pick it at the beginning. They sat down, and then as I went through each character, I asked which color that they chose. And each color that they chose would usually correspond to a character that I would be talking about or a character archetype that I'd be talking about. And so I think that actually helped keep the audience engaged. Food is usually pretty safe in terms of getting audience engagement. But that was just, kind of an example of the visual aid that I used for my presentation. So kind of backtracking a little bit. So once you figure out your presentation software, you probably need to figure out what to include in your presentation. So this breakdown of elements to include is very basic and generic for any kind of research project. But the way this is broken down is that you want to begin with an introduction and a hook to engage your audience and to get them interested. Your body comes next, which is kind of the meat of your presentation and the meat of your main idea. Next comes a rebuttal, if applicable, especially if you're doing an argumentative or persuasive type of presentation. And then you want to have a conclusion to wrap everything up. References and works cited are included at the end. You can also scatter these throughout the presentation if you need to kind of establish credit with your audience and show that you did your research. So when you're maybe in the body of your presentation, you can say, so and so from the Journal of Business said, and then include a fact. That's kind of using a reference in the second part of this breakdown rather than putting it at the end. But this can work as a good outline to kind of get you started. But every presentation will be a little different, so you may not follow this completely to a T. So I do have an example of what not to do. This is available on Canvas as well, but this is from apa.org, and it is quite possibly the world's worst PowerPoint presentation ever. So it basically shows you what not to do in terms of making your slideshows aesthetically pleasing and making them look good. So the thing that's wrong with this slide is that there's too much text. It's a lot to take in, and the amount of time that someone will probably spend on this slide won't be long enough for everybody to read the whole paragraph that's there. So you want to make sure you don't put large blocks of text in slides. Emphasize just the main points. If you really need to kind of stop yourself, you can use the 6x6 rule, and don't be afraid to use pictures. You do want to use a large font, but not too large, just large enough so that the audience can read it. The next slide has a slide with the text looks fine, and the picture looks great. However, the colors are too contrasting or too similar, so you want to make sure you choose some colors that will work a little better. Usually, dark text and a light background is best. You can usually experiment with a couple colors. You don't want to use colors that fade into the background, so don't use blue and black together. And avoid colorblind combinations such as red and green and blue and yellow. The next slide, we've got a bunch of pictures about suits. This slide has too many pictures. It's a little overwhelming. You want to use pictures, but you don't want them to use you. You want to keep your slides simple, and too much on each slide can divert the audience away from content and can be distracting. Too many pictures can also make saving a presentation difficult because it makes the file too big. As a good rule of thumb, 1 to 2 pictures per slide is usually enough, and that's really all you would need. So this next slide here, this one looks pretty good. The only problem is that you actually can't see it because this is a PDF. But what you do want to do is don't use too much slide animation, and those are transitions and things like that. You want to just keep your slides simple. You can apply maybe 1, maybe 2 slide transitions and 1 animation scheme to all slides, but don't make it more than that. And don't change between styles. A single style will make a presentation look more unified. And busy presentations with too many animations can divert an audience from paying attention to the actual content. So this slide is actually supposed to represent something where maybe you had a file in one of your slides and it looks great. Then you don't check it for a couple weeks, and then it comes time to present, and now the file is missing, or it's corrupted, or it's not there. This applies to putting hyperlinks into presentations as well. So you want to make sure that you double check all of your files, attachments, and links before giving a presentation to make sure that they still work. Because if you don't and it doesn't work, you have to figure out what to do on the spot. So to wrap things up with this example, think about Murphy's Law when presenting. Something will probably go wrong at some point, so you just want to make sure you test your presentation before you show it, have a backup of your presentation on hand just in case, and be prepared to do the presentation without the slides. Professionals will usually print handouts for the audience, but it's good to just have enough knowledge to do the presentation if for some reason you can't actually load up the PowerPoint. So hopefully that gave you some examples on, what not to do and gave you a visual as to how to best approach it. So kind of going off of that, you want to make sure that section headings and subheadings are larger than the body text. Body text and paragraphs should be readable from a shared computer screen. And then backgrounds and images should only highlight the most relevant pieces of your presentation or research, but do not totally distract the audience. They're kind of great for driving the point home and kind of making that giving that extra oomph to your text. You want to make sure you use enough color in the backgrounds and use it strategically to make it easier to read. Don't use similar colors and use contrasting colors in charts and graphs for making comparisons. So some good examples would be like black and white, green and gray, depending on how bright it is. And then when it comes to fonts, use a bolded text for larger fonts only. Don't use it for smaller text. And use all capital letters only for short phrases or titles and headings. You do want to avoid fancy fonts. You want to make sure you use things like Times New Roman, Calibri, Source Sans Pro, or Average. You don't want to use, fancy things that can be hard to read. It's a good idea to place the title of your slide or presentation near the top of the page, and it should be legible from a computer screen or poster. So just make sure everything is the right size so everyone can read it. So lastly, before finalizing your presentation, you might want to test the text readability on each slide. You can even show somebody else to watch it for you. Make sure that the visual aids are readable as well. Make sure the formatting is correct. You can even have a friend view your presentation from a computer screen if presenting virtually, and that way you'll know for sure if it's going to work well, both in person and online if you're presenting virtually. And we always encourage people to use spell check to make sure there's no grammar errors. Some other miscellaneous preparations that can help you effectively present. Make sure you dress appropriately by wearing appropriate attire depending on the occasion. So if it's for a job interview, make sure you dress professionally. If it's for a class, dress according to the assignment instructions, things like that. You might also want to create note cards for each slide so that you know what to say and you can stay on track. Review your information and research beforehand to make sure that you don't go in cold. And it might be a good idea to get familiar with the presentation location, software, and program if you can do that before the presentation day. So if you know where you're going to present, it might be a good idea to scope it out before you present, just so you kind of know what to expect. Well, the most important thing to remember is that you know your presentation the best because you're the one who did the work. So it should be an exciting way for you to share what you've learned and share the work that you've done with an audience. And so this is a good mindset to have if you do get a little nervous about presenting, because it's just remember that you know the presentation the best because you're the one who actually did the work and the research for it. So with that being said, I hope that this presentation on presenting will help you prepare a little bit better for your next project or presentation. And remember that this can be applied to anything that's not even directly related to a class. I mean, this will apply to job interviews if you need to present at an interview, and just general public speaking skills are really good in the professional world when you graduate from University of Findlay, or if you go on to postgraduate work or anything like that. So we hope that this helped you out. Feel free to check out our Canvas page for extra resources and links to things related to this Presentations 101 workshop. And we wish you guys luck in your next set of presentations. We'll see you guys next time.